All right, so moving on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my thoughts on the UFC co-main event that took place at UFC 294 between Khamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman. So we saw that Khamzat Chimaev picked up the victory against Kamaru Usman in the co-main event of UFC 294. Khamzat Chimaev defeated Kamaru Usman by majority decision to extend his undefeated record to 13-0 in the UFC. So, just like I said in the beginning in the beginning segment, Alexander Volkanovski saved UFC 294. And the same can be said with Kamaru Usman stepping in on a late notice as well, helping the co-main event even become a bigger attraction in a fight with Khamzat Chimaev. That was outstanding for Kamaru Usman to step in on late notice. But in this fight between Khamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman, the fight was very close. And I'm not saying the victory should have went to Kamaru Usman. Khamzat Chimaev was the right man for the job. He was the right man that got his hand raised. But what won the fight for Kamaru Usman, what won the fight for Khamzat Chimaev was the way how he out-wrestled Kamaru Usman, something we're not really used to seeing in the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev is really the only man that I've seen just toy around with Kamaru Usman in terms of wrestling and grappling ever seen Kamaru Usman fight in the UFC. And he kept him grounded. Khamzat Chimaev, this was really the reason why he won this fight. He kept him grounded for a total of 6 minutes. He had a ground control of 6 minutes over Kamaru Usman in this fight, and his victory against him in the co-main event of UFC 294. But this is what I'm going to say about this fight. I really believe the way how things played out with the injury that happened to Khamzat Chimaev, announcing a few moments after the fight that he had a wrist injury that he sustained early in that fight. And if Kamaru Usman pulled off the victory, I think he could have pulled off the victory if this fight was a total of 5 rounds instead of 3 rounds, because it's facts. I'm not making excuses for Kamaru Usman taking this fight on late notice, but Kamaru Usman was starting to land strikes towards the end of the fight in the 3rd round, and could have potentially won this fight by the judges' scorecards by unanimous majority decision if the fight was at least 2 more rounds. That's how I was scoring it. I thought Kamaru Usman was coming on in the 3rd round, but Khamzat Chimaev did a great job grappling him and keeping him grounded in the final moments of that fight. But if it went on for 5 rounds instead of 3, with the wrist injury to Khamzat Chimaev and the way how he was getting tagged by those strikes by Kamaru Usman, I do believe that it could have been a different outcome if it went 5 rounds. I think Kamaru Usman would have won that fight by majority decision. And he even said it himself after the fight. But like I said, I'm not making any excuses for Khamzat Chimaev or Kamaru Usman. The victory went to Khamzat Chimaev as it should have, as I get tongue-tied. But yes, the right man won that fight in a great fight in the co-main event. So what's next for Khamzat Chimaev? Dana White did say that week, building up to the fight, that the winner of that fight between Khamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman would be in line to fight Sean Strickland for a middleweight championship opportunity down the line. So I think Dana White's going to keep his word, and I think Khamzat Chimaev is in line next to fight Sean Strickland for the middleweight championship. And I do believe that we will be seeing that fight between Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev in the early part of 2024. So what's next for Kamaru Usman? Like I said in the beginning of the segment, he deserves his flowers. He deserves his credit for helping save the card of UFC 294, for stepping in on 11 days' notice to fight Khamzat Chimaev, one of the hottest rising stars that the UFC has to offer today. And he did it moving up from the welterweight division to the middleweight division to fight Khamzat Chimaev on an 11-day notice. But it's back to the drawing board for Kamaru Usman. He has now lost 3 fights in a row, dating back to late of 2022 when he lost the welterweight championship to Leon Edwards. Then lost the rematch of Leon Edwards in March for the welterweight title. Then just lost to Khamzat Chimaev. That's 3 victories lost in a row for Kamaru Usman. I think it's time for him to go back to the drawing board. But if Kamaru Usman decides to stick around and stay in the middleweight division, which I think he should, he's done everything he could at the welterweight division, one of the greatest welterweight champions in UFC history, with a reign over 1,200 days long. If he decides to stick around in the middleweight division, there's some good dream fights for him to take place in the middleweight division. There's a fight with Islam a dream fight with Islam Adesanya that could take place in the middleweight division. There's a fight with Dricus Du Plessis that could take place in the middleweight division, or a fight with Robert Whittaker that could take place in the middleweight division. There's a lot of big money fights for Kamaru Usman, and if he can knock off one of those three guys that I just mentioned, he can get himself back into the title contention for the middleweight championship, or set up a rematch with Khamzat Chimaev down the line. There's a lot to offer for him being in the in the middleweight division now, if he sticks around. But those are my thoughts on Khamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman. My fight summary for the co-main event that took place at UFC 294.